read. Good. He can be described as his Macquarie website, although he's got several, a paleographer, epigraphist, and papyrologist with a research focus in ancient religion and magic. Now, that's very close to what a lot of us wish we knew more about and are very interested in, Michael, so that's terrific. He's a director at large of the American Society of Papyrologists, and probably those of you who are into papyrology like Gillian will know very well how prestigious that is, and a senior editor of the Supplementum Epigraphicum Graecum, the collection of Greek papyri, which is what Greek inscriptions, is what I'm excited about. And he worked on the lexicon of Greek personal names. I knew a couple of his, I'm afraid now, long passed on to another world predecessors, but it was an interesting conversation. So welcome, Michael. Thank you for sharing Christian horoscopes on papyrus, and we're all looking forward very much to hearing about them.
Oh, thanks so much, Ilana. That's very kind, and it's a pleasure to join you. Let me see if I can share slides. Yes, there it is, and I need to get to the beginning, and I'll make that full screen. And just could someone just confirm that that's visible?
It is.
Great, thank you, Leslie. All right. My topic this evening is a handful of Christian or arguably Christian horoscopes on papyri and one on parchment. Papyri, I know, need no introduction in this gathering, but a few words on horoscopes may be in order. First, on the definition. Now, you may be more familiar, whatever your views on their value, with the modern newspaper horoscopes like this one from a recent Sydney Morning Herald, that give forecasts based on a person's connection to one of the 12 zodiac signs. More on those in due course. A connection through birth when the sun was in that sign. Now, the ancient horoscopes relevant to the Christian papyri were different. They provide the etymology of the genre horoscope itself, in that the central element is still one zodiac sign, but not where the sun is, rather one which was rising on the eastern horizon at the moment in question. Often it's births, but not exclusively. One could cast a horoscope for other events, even in the future. For example, if one wanted to know whether a lecture would be worth attending. Now, the word for that sign, the zodiac sign when it's on the horizon, is in Greek horoskopos, or hour marker, literally, as it changed roughly every other hour. Besides that, the ancient horoscope also differs in that it required positions for all the planets known in antiquity, so Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, plus Sun and Moon, even when they were invisible below the horizon at the moment in question. And finally, whereas the modern horoscope is concerned with predictions, the ancient one is a more objective record of all those positions penned down on papyrus, usually without any interpretation. That analysis was done with the help of handbooks, fragments of which we do have on papyrus, but apparently delivered separately, perhaps orally, during a consultation between a professional and a paying client. And as I've mentioned, the positions of the planets were needed even when invisible. So we're not dealing with observation, but with computation. And how they did that is a different story. It's an interesting one, not for this evening, but one that's part of how the astral sciences, what we think of as separate astrology and astronomy, spread west from their shared birthplace in ancient Mesopotamia. Our topic tonight is different. How do the papyri show Christians receiving, conditionally accepting horoscopes as part of this ancient scientific inheritance? And how do early Christianity and late antiquity inflect the arc of the astral sciences from antiquity to the Christian Middle Ages, where they had a vibrant career? So to start, a closer look at these Christian horoscope papyri. In 1959, the historian of science Otto Neugebauer and the philologist and librarian Henry Bartlett van Hosen published a landmark volume in the study of ancient and late ancient astronomy and astrology, Greek horoscopes, collecting nearly 200 witnesses to this document type on papyrus. Most, if not all, would have been drawn up by professional astrologers and presented to clients as starting points for consultations, and based on positions of the planets looked up in astronomical tables for a time of birth supplied by the client. And we have a good number of fragments of these astronomical tables on papyrus too. The latest dated of the horoscope texts for a birth in 478 CE is accompanied in this book, in Greek horoscopes, by the notice that, quote, the original of this text is unfortunately lost, end of quote. The papyrus in question, first published in volume 16 of the Oxyrhynchus papyri, was apparently for this reason presented only in a translation, representing emendations to the text of the first edition and a corrected dating. And this volume 16 of Piazzi, published in 1924, was actually the last under the editorship of Bernard Grenfell, a founding figure in the modern discipline of papyrology. His colleague Arthur Hunt, who with him led the excavations at Batnasa, site of ancient Oxyrhynchus, about 200 kilometers south of Cairo, would continue to edit one more volume after that. Now, happily, the papyrus is not lost, as Neugebauer and Van Hosen feared. In fact, as already noted in passing by the historian of science Alexander Jones in 1999, it is still kept among the rest of the papyri from the same excavations in Oxford. But this uncertainty about its whereabouts has probably contributed to how it has failed to attract its due attention. The occasion to check the emendations represented by Neugebauer and Van Hosen's translation was the original impetus for this paper. A new facsimile easily confirms most of the readings of the first editors, but some refinements can be made, leading to the text shown on this slide. We have 10 lines in two elegant practiced hands of the late 5th or early 6th century CE. The first line, which Neugebauer and Van Hosen translate as Christos with a query, contains a row-headed staurogram rather than a Cairo monogram as printed in the first edition, but not set as there on a distinct line of its own, but engaged with the last letter of the first line of Greek text. It is best taken as a paratextual marker of good auspices in a Christian context, not an abbreviation to be literally pronounced as Christos. That path had led Neugebauer and Van Hosen to suppose that the second line, to quote their commentary, might be an invocation of the Lord Anubis. To call Anubis Kurios would be in line with common Egyptian usage to call a god the lord of a locality, end of quote. This line, an addition of a hand distinct from the main text and in a smaller size, is better taken with the first editors as identifying the person for whom the horoscope was cast, one Anup, whose name, though etymologically a theophoric of the Egyptian god Anubis, was comfortably borne by Christians, including a saint whose martyrdom is recorded in the time of Diocletian. The horoscope proper begins with a dating clause, placing the birth of Anup in year 194 of the reign of Diocletian, the 5th of Epaph using the Egyptian month name, and a reflex of that persists as Abib in the Coptic calendar still used by Egyptian Christians. Now, this date works out to the 29th of June on the Julian calendar, the forerunner to our Gregorian calendar, in the year 478 of the Common Era. The notation of the hour of day, now lost at the end of the third line, was relevant to compute the zodiac sign on the horizon, the ascendant or horoscopos, which you'll recall gives the genre of horoscopes its name. Then there follow, each on its own line, records of the position of the sun and moon, and each of the 5 planets known in antiquity, in descending order of distance from the Earth, which was conceived as the center of the universe. Each is represented by the name of the god or goddess with whom it was associated, Helios and Selene for sun and moon, respectively, Kronos for Saturn, Zeus for Jupiter, and so on. These positions are given in one of the 12 zodiac signs. And originally, these were reference constellations along the path of the sun, what we call the ecliptic, the path that the sun completed in its annual motion with respect to the fixed stars. And then in an innovation in Mesopotamia, in Babylonia, around 400 BCE, they were converted into 12 equal divisions of 30 degrees each, named after but no longer exactly contiguous with the original constellations. The sun thus moves approximately 1 degree per day. Now here, the sun is recorded as being in 5 degrees, moirai in Greek, of the crab, that is Cancer, the zodiac sign Cancer, with further precision down to minutes, lepta in Greek, of which there are 60 in each degree. And so the sun is 5/6 of the way past the 5th degree and towards the 6th degree of Cancer. As far as they're preserved, the minute values are all integers and factors of 10. The moon at 17 degrees, 10 minutes in Sagittarius, then Saturn in 6 degrees, 50 minutes of Virgo. And we can note that the numbers throughout are in the familiar alphabetic notation. That is, the letter alpha has the value 1, through theta as 9, then iota as 10, and so iota zeta is 17. But the position for Jupiter shows a notation exclusive to the astral sciences in Greek, a character to represent 0, not otherwise familiar in Western mathematical notation until the arrival of the Indian cipher digit via Arabic. Here, the usage is more restricted. Originally, this is a practice connected to the adaptation of Babylonian sexagesimal notation, that is base 60 rather than base 10 as familiar in Greek. The sign in question, which resembles a sort of squashed version of our modern 0 with a horizontal overstroke, probably has its origin in turn in an Egyptian, demotic Egyptian writing of a negation. There isn't any, there aren't any, or similar. Here, the practical function is to indicate that for this position, the value of degrees is 0, but presumably there is a positive value of minutes, and so Jupiter was recorded just past the beginning of Capricorn, somewhere in its 1st degree. The entry for Mars follows that, then Venus, but nothing past the name of the latter, and Mercury is entirely lost. So too is the central element of the horoscope, the position for the horoscopos itself, whose calculation motivated the notation of the time of day in the 3rd line. This would have required, in turn, the place of the birth, as the zodiac signs appear to rise at different rates, at different speeds, depending on one's latitude on Earth. Now, all in all, this is a better than average product as a horoscope. It's in the minority of texts that use precision down to minutes. The majority do not even have degrees. That is, they simply have locations of the planets in a zodiac sign. The greater precision would have facilitated the application of more advanced astrological doctrines in the interpretation of these data. For example, the so-called lots, kleroi in Greek, which are effectively additional planet-like positions that can be plotted by calculating the arc length along the ecliptic, the sun's annual path, the arc between the 2 planets, and then projecting this from other points, chiefly the ascendant, the horoscopos itself. And the positions are not only precise, but also accurate, holding up well when compared to the most advanced astronomical works available at the time, the computations of Claudius Ptolemy, the best known of the ancient astronomers, and also when compared to modern recomputations based on data from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The papyrus is never more than a couple degrees off from Ptolemy, whose differences from the modern values are negligible except for the especially difficult case of the fast-moving moon. But the chief result of interest in this setting is that we have the earliest published papyrus horoscope that can conclusively be shown to be Christian through the auspicious symbol of the cross in its first line. Now we turn to how to contextualize it with historical developments in late antiquity, in particular the Christianization of Egypt and the rest of the Eastern Roman Empire, from elite intellectuals to local practitioners of the astral sciences to their clients. And these clients who might have received such presentation copies as represented by the Oxyrhynchus papyrus. As is well known, astrology provoked strongly negative reactions from Christian authors. Here, just by way of example, is praise from Tertullian for Roman imperial legislation expelling astrologers from Italy, and thus also getting rid of idolatrous so-called angels involved in the workings of astrology. According to him, the rulers have, however, unwittingly done God's work in passing a divine sentence that in its effect reaches even the earth, and to which even those who are ignorant of it bear witness. The astrologers are banned just as their angels are. Rome and Italy are forbidden to the astrologers just as heaven is to their angels. A more complex reality on the ground is reflected in the documentary sources. Planetary data suggesting astrological interpretation were part of Christian funerary epigraphy, as you see also on this slide. The family of this Roman youth, Simplicius, may have seriously disappointed Tertullian by choosing to include them in Italy's very capital. And in the papyri especially, some demonstrably Christian texts continue a fashion for original horoscopes drafted by professionals and presented to clients, but in more limited numbers. The relevant texts have yet to be studied comprehensively. Besides the Oxyrhynchus papyrus with which I began, I am aware of one other certain case. So this papyrus, from the same excavations of Grenfell and Hunt at Oxyrhynchus, is for a birth in 508. Thus, it also happens to be our latest dated Greek horoscope on papyrus. An opening staurogram makes a Christian context certain, and the name of the subject of analysis, Theodoros, given in the first line, suits this well too. There is an opening formula of good auspices, ep agathois, then dating to the 224th year of the same Diocletian era, and timing to the night of the 6th, leading into the 7th of the month Mechir, hour 7 of the night. Finally, a reference to the civil taxation cycle, the indiction, is added, introduced in fact under Diocletian himself, but it is rare in horoscopes, appearing elsewhere only in a group from late 4th century Antinopolis that we'll meet in due course. The indiction survives in timekeeping long into Byzantium, familiar in the colophons of medieval Greek manuscripts. Now here, the planets are represented by symbols, but their coordinates are again the familiar zodiac signs, here again with precision down to degrees and minutes. And the fact that the minutes are unround, that is, they can't be explained by factors of 5, 10, suggests even greater precision than the earlier Christian horoscope with which we began. Additional data are provided on the planet's motion at the head of each line, with the abbreviated notes aphiretikos and prosthetikos, literally subtractive and additive respectively. In this context, that is with respect to longitude along the ecliptic, or retrograde and prograde. And the reason for noting these is probably once again astrological, as a planet being in retrograde or appearing from a perspective on Earth to move backwards in the sky was considered to modify the usual character of that planet that it imparted through its astrological influences. And you can see, if you can see my cursor, here are a couple of the symbols, sun and moon, and here are these notations of motion phenomena, just here. Now this time, the position of the ascendant survives at the end in 27 degrees 30 minutes of Scorpio, and the editor notes that it matches the value recomputed from the method of Claudius Ptolemy, but not for the latitude of Oxyrhynchus in lower Middle Egypt, as one might expect, where the papyrus was found. but rather a band of latitude centered on Meroe in modern Ethiopia. We would have to do then with a background of migration from Egypt's southern neighbors. Now, there are a few other possibilities for identifying Christian horoscopes in the papyrological record beyond these two certain cases. Neugebauer and Van Hosen included a first publication of an unusual horoscope in their volume, a manuscript now in Paris. Unlike all the rest so far known, it is not on papyrus or on an ostrakhan, or the rarer wooden board found, for example, at Kellis, but rather a sheet of parchment. Now they, Neugebauer and Van Hosen, describe the disposition of this manuscript as follows, to quote, "Parchment folded in zigzag, the ends pasted to stiff covers. The first 3 pages contain some legal statements, followed by signatures, but without a date. Then follow 3 empty pages, and finally 2 pages inscribed by another hand and upside down as compared with the text at the beginning." End of quote. Only these last 2 pages constitute the horoscope. The legal statements, however, prove to be a formal Christian letter of recommendation for one pakion, issued by an ecclesiastical authority, which the bearer probably had framed up in these decorated wooden boards. And it remains unpublished. In fact, my visit to Paris earlier this year for some other papyrological work at the Collège de France, kindly supported by SEC, and under the auspices of Korshi Dosu, among others, an alumnus of Macquarie, who many of you will remember. This same visit brought me the hope that I might see this interesting parchment in person, but unfortunately, despite a diligent search by the curator, Marc Etienne, it couldn't be located. In any case, archival photographs, which you saw on the last slide, from the papers of Otto Neugebauer, now at the University of Michigan, do allow reasonably secure readings of the text. The horoscope is for the birth of a man named Koprias in 326. It is of a simpler form, different from the 2 horoscopes that we've seen so far, and in fact closer to the norm among original horoscopes on papyrus as a whole, especially in the Roman as opposed to late ancient period. It gives only the basic positions in whole zodiac signs. The different names complicate a direct connection between the horoscope and the letter, so Koprias versus Pakion. Most likely the men were once again members of the same family. The ensemble embodies a sort of tension in late ancient astrology between pride and peril, profit and insecurity, which inspired ostentatious display, the more expensive parchment, these elegant decorated wooden covers, but also favored the means for ready concealment. So this is a small package that can be folded up and hidden. Our second possible edition is a small papyrus archive from Antinopolis, now in Florence, with a group of horoscopes for births in a single family in the 4th century. One Hermesion probably copied first a relatively elaborate horoscope for his own birth in 338, including the planetary positions and calculations of additional parameters useful for astrological forecasts. The lots that I mentioned in connection to our first text, and the position of planets in astrological houses, terms, and decans. Then, pressing into service the backs of 2 further sheets of papyrus originally used for documentary texts, Hermesion copied 9 other horoscopes of a simpler form for births whose dates, ranging down to 385, suggest that they were for members of his family. Duplicates of the horoscopes for Ioannes and Kyros underscore the personal quality of this archival documentation. Elsewhere, such duplicates may suggest consultation of multiple professionals, but here they might rather serve a working method with multiple drafts. Copies of multiplication tables on the same sheets suggest an interest in training in the computations behind both the casting of horoscopes and their use in forecasting. So on this slide, you see one of these tables in the left column, upside down with respect to the horoscopes, which are the more elaborate one for Hermesion himself and one of two duplicates for Ioannis. That's this column here. And then here I've just flipped upside down a detail of the mathematical table, the multiplication table. The presence of his name, the name of Ioannis, in the onomastic stock of the family is a significant clue, alongside his relative Neistia. These names suggest that, at least eventually, as in the case of the Paris parchment, the family and its horoscopes came to include Christians. Ioannis is a biblical name, unlikely to be borne by anyone outside the Jewish or Christian faiths at this date and location, and the probable derivation of Neistia from Neistea, fasting, further supports a Christian context. Finally, taking a cue from these identifications, we can take a last look at the corpus of horoscopes represented by Alexander Jones's 1999 volume. One more papyrus, numbered 4,274 in that volume, has two horoscopes for births in 480 and 503, making it nearly contemporary with 4275 that we've already seen, but unlike the latter, it has no sign of Christianity, such as a paratextual staurogram, and the names of those born aren't given, removing the onomastic criteria. In short, this is a suggestion that more Christian horoscopes may be hiding in plain sight, or perhaps remain to be discovered. So one more, number 4265, a century earlier, is another double document for births in 313 and 348. It may have a staurogram after all, if the last line, previously read as a monogram for horoskopos, the ascendant, is understood to contain one of these instead. This horoscope, in fact, already notes the horoskopos above in line 9, and a repetition of it is unexpected. So we have at least two papyri that can be claimed as Christian horoscopes, and possibly several more. Further, the Paris parchment and the Florence papyrus archive show embedding of these documents in the tissue of daily life. The Christians concerned with these horoscopes were no isolated esoterics. So I'd now like to turn to a research question that I hope to develop in further work on the textual basis just outlined. That is, what changed in these Christian horoscopes with respect to earlier original horoscopes, and how do the underlying transformations point ahead to the conditional embrace of the science by Christians documented in the Middle Ages and indeed right through to early modern times with, for example, John of Lübeck using it in the 1470s to predict the birth of the Antichrist precisely on the 13th of September, 1506. That didn't really turn out the way he thought it would. In general, in fact, a lack of change is the most striking result. Format, textual formulary and content, and scientific method are all closely comparable, and the differences that do emerge seem within the range of overall variation of the pre-Christian horoscopes in their hundreds. We saw in the opening case from Oxyrhynchus that a Christian compiler was prepared to use regnal year dating of Diocletian, a villain of countless Christian hagiographies, and even to apply the epithet eusebes, pious, if not a formulaic holdover, perhaps by metonymy, to refer to piety that was managed despite him. What does differ, and in turn allows the horoscopes to be detected as Christian in the first place, are paratextual marks and the names of the users themselves as marks of identity. A relatively straightforward case of adoption, it might seem, but how successful was it really? A negative answer is suggested by the disappearance of these horoscopes after the early 6th century. Greek papyri as a whole continue in Egypt in significant numbers up to and indeed for decades after the Islamic conquest in 640, so it cannot merely be a chance of survival. A related question: why are there no Coptic, or Old Nubian for that matter, horoscopes from Egypt and its southern neighbors, but there are Arabic ones on papyrus from Egypt? Arabic horoscopes appear no later than the 9th century. This papyrus concerning a birth towards the end of the 9th century has thus both our latest dated horoscope on papyrus and our first dated horoscope in Arabic. There is some other evidence that points away from a lack of interest for Christians, but rather to a choice of different methods. And these are the so-called zodiologia. These fascinating treatises deserve fuller study than they've received so far. I'll give just a brief overview of them here. They seem to have taken shape in late antiquity and are richly attested in Greek up to modern times. They allow comprehensive forecasts for the life based on a simpler data set, a single significant zodiac sign at the time of birth, variously defined over the long tradition of these texts as the sign in which the moon was, the sign that was on the horizon, or the sign in which the sun was at birth. And this last option essentially allows a conversion of astral science to calendric observance and foreshadows the modern newspaper horoscopes like the one that we saw on the opening slide. A codex of the late 11th century, now in Moscow, has the predictions for the life of a woman, which you see on the slide in translation. There isn't time to go into the details, but I'll note in passing some features common to the genre: forecasts combining personal life and physical traits, predicted years of medical crisis, and relations among the constellations represented by the zodiac signs, the eponymous living things in their earthly forms, and the people born under them. So here the celestial and the earthly bull, which is the source of medicinal material for the woman born on earth under Taurus, whose name is owed to the Greek word for bull. But there's more to the story, as the disappearance of Christian original horoscopes on papyrus after the 6th century belies the popularity of manuscripts on astrology in Byzantium. We have hundreds of such manuscripts. An elite author in Latin on astrology was also counted among the Christians. This is the 4th century Firmicus Maternus, though the timing of his astrological books in relation to a midlife conversion to Christianity remains unclear. The Byzantine Greek manuscripts contain horoscopes too, but not the kind for presentation to clients, which we find among the papyri and which specialists call original horoscopes, but rather case studies for analysis, including analysis of highly placed individuals as early as the reign of the Emperor Zeno, and including a horoscope for the Emperor Constantine VII himself. The horoscopes are not only for births and for individuals, but also for political events. The foundation of Constantinople itself received this treatment, and I'll conclude the talk with a case that recenters the tradition of expertise in the astral sciences in Egypt, home of our papyri. A fictitious account, probably composed in the late 8th century, was attributed to Stephanus of Alexandria, an author on the astral sciences who had died a century earlier. It is commonly known as a horoscope for Islam, but it focuses specifically on the political fortunes of Muhammad and his successor caliphs, though some broader characteristics of adherents of Islam are also traced. Thus, it has a claim to be a horoscope for an entire ethnic group, ethnos in Greek, but not at its birth. Rather, at the moment Stephanus is first said to have heard about Muhammad from a merchant just arriving at Alexandria from the Arabian Peninsula. The horoscope is framed as the culmination of a theory of the astral sciences in which divine providence activates the celestial bodies that in turn move events on Earth, including international strife and the fortunes of war. Perfect knowledge of all of that is God's alone, but humans can attain partial knowledge and foreknowledge by conjecture through the stars. All that follows is thoroughly grounded in the Hellenistic astral sciences to which the papyrus horoscopes belong. Now, to prove the validity of this system, Stephanus recounts a visit from one Epiphanius, an Arabian merchant traveling from the Arabian Peninsula, who is in some distress. He asks Stephanus to have one of his students prepare the astrolabe and determine the degree of the ascendant and the motion of the stars, faced as he is with the appearance of this charismatic prophet, Muhammad, and the success of his teachings. Stephanus uses this astronomical instrument to confirm the ascendant degree and the positions of the planets, then looks closely at his astrological books to find out their significance, how to interpret these data. Fixing the date allows the position of the sun to be determined, and these data are then entered into the astrolabe that yields the ascendant. For Stephanus, this leads to a sinister result in connection to the planet Saturn, one of those planets which are by nature destructive, and in a significant relation to Venus. The manuscript tradition also visualizes the horoscope at this point in a format familiar in Byzantine astrology, which is designed to show the alignment of zodiac and the dodecatropos in particular, which is a renumbering of the zodiac signs starting from the ascendant, and we'll come back to that system in short order. The analysis continues to general comments about the character of the ethnos through the combined influences of planets and signs. They won't drink wine or eat pork because wine is associated with the sun and pigs with Mars, planets which are by nature opposed to Saturn and Venus. They will take over Egypt because it belongs to Mercury, but ultimately be resisted by Rome because of its guiding light, the sun. After that comes a lifetime calculation of sorts, and this is one of the key components of Greco-Roman astrology that also made it dangerous, for it could be turned even upon the emperors. One could theoretically calculate how much time an emperor has left. By some ad hoc twists and turns of doctrine, the author arrives at 152 years, and the planet Saturn imposes a number 24, the same as its degrees, on the total of Muhammad and his successors. Systematic analysis of the stages of that life, in the Greek hosper epigenesios, just as in the case of a birth, follows through the dodecatropos, or 12 traits, which I mentioned in connection to the diagram. And this is another widespread technique in Greco-Roman astrology, a way of renumbering the 12 zodiac signs based on the ascendant, the most significant of them, to assign to each of them a predictive scope. Implications can be drawn from many factors. For example, boldness and lack of fear in the face of death are drawn here from the endurance inherent in the nature of the bull, since Taurus, the celestial bull, is assigned to place 8, sign number 8. Then each of the rulers is characterized through planetary temperaments, a topic also discussed extensively by Greco-Roman astrologers, based on planets in influential positions at the times of their accession. The first one, Muhammad himself, is Saturnine with an admixture of Venus. These account for their physical appearance, which is described in detail. The second, for example, is shorter than average, small-eyed, dark-complexioned, elegant. Their times of death are fixed too. For example, for Muhammad, this is explained by Saturn reaching its own term at the end of Scorpio, where it was indeed found in 632. And these in general match historical records reasonably well, down to the reign of the Caliph Mahdi in the 770s, which is the basis for the conclusion of Hermann Usener that the whole series was contrived around that time, then projected into the future, as you see on this slide, towards an ultimate victory for the Romans, as the heirs of Constantine still called themselves. This recourse to ancient knowledge is presented as a response to one of the gravest crises faced by the Eastern Roman Empire set up by Constantine. It confirms and continues the conditional embrace of the astral sciences at a critical time in late antiquity, as we saw in the papyri, even as social and intellectual conditions led to their transformation away from the sorts of horoscopes familiar from Roman Egypt. And I'll end there, and thank you very much for your attention.
Alana, you need to unmute.
Well, I was just actually contemplating how impressive that was, Michael. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, very well, thanks, Alana.
I know others will want to comment, but no, I just love it. There's so many little gems scattered through. I'd never heard the name Nestia before, and I am really interested in ancient names, particularly Christian ones. So that was fascinating. Also, your mention of our colleague, our former colleague and student, Corsi Dosu. Sorry you couldn't find that papyrus. And it's really fascinating what you found out. So I'm looking forward to hearing what others think. And let's throw it open for questions now. Here we are. I'm sure somebody will have a question. Craig, was that you? Oh.
Craig, if you want to, anybody who wants to speak, please unmute.
Oh, well, that's right. I see we've been joined by a few more people, including Don and Nicola, a new member, and of course, Gillian, who's a papyrus expert. Some of these, they're somewhat later than ones that some of my colleagues and I knew very much about, although going into the 6th and 7th century is very interesting. But the way you've related it to the history of the period too, I thought was quite fascinating. They obviously wanted to hear some of the things. By the time the Byzantines were having such a lot of trouble fighting the Arabs, they really wanted to hear some of these things, didn't they, Michael?
That's right. I think they were happy to have this comforting prediction about the future, which could ground itself in seeming to account for the past up to that point. Yes, it didn't. Once again, just like John of Lubeck and his Antichrist predictions, it didn't work out the way the pseudo Stephanus predicted. But this is the nature of such things.
Oh, that was a dry comment of yours. It didn't work out that way.
Here is the earliest text that I've got, Alana. This is 326, the birth in 326.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, indeed, this is later than this is somewhat later than the core
Christian papyri period. That's right.
Yes.
But then you made the point that Coptic papyri and so on don't have them. I like the way that woman lived to 75. That's a good figure for those who are calculating demographics in the ancient world, isn't it?
This is the Zodiologion. Yes, you hear right. Yes, she has the hope to live for 75 years if she makes it past
all those crises.
This is the key. This is the way that the text allows itself to be flexible. Yes, she needs the help with the bulls from the bull's horn and the hairs from the bull and the incense and cedar oil to make it past these years.
Well, I think we need to hear from some other people. Don, did you have a comment?
Don, you have to unmute.
I'm trying. I'm trying.
Well done.
A couple of things. The 6th century mural on the ground of the synagogue with the zodiac sign. So I just wonder how much were Jews into astrology and zodiac signs and things like that?
I think, yeah, I think they would. My impression is that they were the one who's doing the sort of cutting edge of research on this is being done by Gideon Bohak. But I get the sense from talking to him that there's considerable interest among Jews in late antiquity, but also in the Cairo Geniza. There are astrological texts in the Cairo Geniza. These mosaic floors that you mentioned, Don, the one that I know best is at Beit Alpha, but I think there's at least one other one. But yes, it becomes part of this. It's a sacred space. I think in some way it's a way of it becomes cosmological. One is showing how the world, how the seasons change, and the seasons are represented as well sometimes at the sort of corners of this, and so it's showing you the sun's path. The signs are linked to months. So there's a way of reading it, those in particular, that isn't astrological, but I don't think I think that's that isn't the whole story either, because we have these copies of astrological treatises from the Jewish tradition. So I do think there is this interest in the.
So it seems to me that would then flow into early Christianity.
Yes, indeed, that would be one source. Then there's also the Christian communities in Egypt, which is after Mesopotamia. Ptolemaic and Roman Egypt is a critical place in the development of the sort of astrology that we know, the Hellenistic astrology. So those communities also would have been sort of surrounded by it there too, I think.
And if the Magi were astrologers and looking for some sort of sign, I could imagine that Christians would also follow that sort of pattern in their own lives and in the lives of others.
I think that's right. I think it would be natural for them to do so, and certainly their neighbors or their own traditions before they became Christians would have sort of supplied that. I think and they might have happily kept doing that until someone like Tertullian came along and told them to stop doing it. But yeah.
Well, Tertullian was fairly a hard nut.
Yeah, he even spoiled birthdays. You weren't allowed to have birthdays, were you? That's what things you weren't allowed to have.
Yeah. But thank you, Michael, for that. That's really insightful what you've presented.
Yeah.
Michael,
tonight.
I don't know if you saw the chat from Craig, but he says it's too noisy, so he just put a question. He said, the material is fascinating. How much might first century Christians engage with this?
Yes, thanks, Craig, and thanks, Leslie, for reading that one out. I think, I mean, so some of it has come up through what Don was saying already, where I think that that first century Christians would have had the choice to engage with some of this through the fact that we know that astrology was very much in vogue in the Roman world at this time. So I think there would be much variation in individual experience, but I do think it would have been common, certainly for one's life before a conversion to Christianity. Maybe that changed one's attitude towards astrology, but I think for others, and there were sources like the Clementines in which astrology seems to be both a part of the worldview and even one whose validity is accepted, that the story in fact turns on astrological predictions that more or less come true, as is revealed at the end. So there is this engagement too.
Jonathan Hughes has his hand up.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you. That was a really interesting, interesting talk. I'm currently studying Acts chapter, well, the last few chapters of Acts, and one thing that really stood out for me is that, Daniel Margaret talks a lot about how Luke is deliberately trying to engage both his Christian audience and his pagan audience. And one thing that really sticks out to me is that Margaret talks about how the ship with the figurehead of the Dioscuri is significant to pre-Christians. And I was wondering if that may be an early Christian reference to astrological ideas as much as religious.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay.
That's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about astrology in connection to that. I think that when the relation that comes to mind is that the Dioscuri are connected in some quarters of the astral sciences with the constellation Gemini. So there is possibly a relation there. On the other hand, the Dioscuri are many other things and have this sort of own tradition to them. So it's sort of it's uncertain. But thanks for that. That's interesting to think about.
Gillian has her hand up.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. I was wondering whether it's possible to make any generalizations about the socioeconomic status of the families represented by these horoscopes. Would it have been expensive for someone to commission an astrologer to produce one of these?
Yes, thanks, Julian. It's an excellent question. We don't have as much data about that as we'd like. I think that it wouldn't have been for free. There's certainly a cost, but we really don't know what the cost would be. There's one account, so a documentary account on papyrus, sort of an expense account in which an astrologos is given a payment, but that's all we know. It's just we have the date on which this man is given a payment and the amount. It's not a large amount. It's some number of drachmae in the single digits. But again, we don't know what the service is. Is he sort of on retainer for a family and is giving advice? Is this for one consultation? So it's I think it has to be enough that one can make a living doing this. We do have the sense that the astrologers are professionals. There is elsewhere some evidence, not a lot, but some evidence that there was in fact a trade tax in Roman Egypt on astrologers. So again, they must be making enough money that it's worthwhile for the state to come up with this tax category and administer this special category of astrologer trade tax. But then I think one could look towards the physical features of the papyrus. So this is a fresh piece of papyrus. It's elegantly written, and the data are elaborate. This goes beyond just giving the positions, but already adds well, in this case, it's just more precision of the positions, which allows more refined astrological analysis. But in the other one, I need to be going in the other direction. These texts, for example, we have these extra astrological details about the planetary houses, for example, which have no astronomical reason for being there. We could imagine that, say, driving up the price, or being a making the consultation more expensive, worth more. So that's a lot of that's a sort of a long way of saying that we don't know. We assume that they're that these families are of a relatively elevated status, but we don't know much beyond that. In this case, where the horoscopes are part of an archive, and the archive includes sort of business accounts, one petition, and the mathematical tables. These are educated people who in the case of this Hermesion, are also literate. He knows enough to, wherever he got the basic data of the horoscope, he knows enough to copy it down, or maybe he's even doing some of the work of computing it himself. So that would raise the socioeconomic level considerably. And in fact, if he's doing all of that.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Well, just before I invite us all to thank Michael, I would just like to say, and I hope Julia and others are listening, we are just so honoured to have a man of your erudition connected with Macquarie. And not just the paper that you gave, but the fact that you could answer all those questions off the cuff with all those facts was very impressive. I always think, random questions can be a bit unnerving, but they didn't unnerve you, did they?
No, it's exciting. I'm great, and I'm grateful to the audience for sort of coming with me on this into these somewhat obscure.
Oh, there's 18 people here, and they're all really interested, obviously. So that's terrific. Now, just before I thank you, there are two things I should say. Lynn Kidson sent her apologies. If you could just register that, Leslie. She apologized. She had another meeting, and unfortunately, I don't quite know what happened, but on the back of our event sheet, set calendar of events, I actually forgot to put the time of the talk by Paul McKechnie and catered supper. It's at 7 p.m. I'm sure you all probably worked out because it's a normal time that we have it anyway, and that is when you'd have a lecture and supper. But so that's 7 p.m. And we do hope many of you will come, because a very kind, not only will it be a fascinating lecture from, as you know, another very erudite man connected with Macquarie, but also somebody's very kindly given us a nice supper, so I feel we should be there to eat it. So if people would like to do that, that would be great. So meanwhile, thank you again, Michael. That was very generous of you. And I know it's quite even catchy. You're always traveling to some prestigious spot. But I just want to assure you of, I'm sure I can speak for everybody, our total support of the work you're doing and the work you're going to go on to do, and how much we hope that this will continue into the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Alana. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thanks, Michael.